Welcome to episode 45 of the Hard Truth About B2B e-commerce. I'm your co-host Isaiah Bollinger, and I'm back remote with Tim. We're not in person anymore, unfortunately, but
that was a lot of fun. It was great to do our first episode recording together in person up at the Trellis offices, and we got to do that again soon. I really enjoyed that. But
for sure.
yeah, so this is Timothy Peterson, and let me just give you a shout out to our sponsor, Punch Out To Go. They're a global B2B integration company specializing in connecting commerce business platforms with e-procurement and ERP applications. Punch Out To Go's iPaaS technology seamlessly links business applications to automate the flow of purchasing data. And with their solution, you can immediately reduce integration complexities for Punch Out catalogs, electronic purchase orders, invoices, and other B2B sales order automation documents to accelerate business results. Thanks to our sponsor, Punch Out To Go, and I am very excited to throw this back to you, Isaiah, for our guests today. So please continue.
Yeah, we're extremely lucky to have Dan. I hope I'm not butchering your name, Dan Renda, from currently the senior director of e-commerce at Siemens Healthineers is the name, I believe, and I might be butchering that as well. But Dan has 20 years technology experience in e-commerce. I believe you started on kind of the project management side, on kind of the agency side, similar to what we do at Trellis, our agency, and now you're on the client side at Siemens. Which one of the reasons I was super excited to bring you on is at least on LinkedIn, which I assume is correct, you guys are doing over $1 billion in commerce revenue, B2B commerce revenue. So Dan, thank you for agreeing to join, and give us more information, because I think there's a lot you probably have to say about your background.
Well, thanks for having me on, Isaiah. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. So my background, you're correct. I started my career largely in the project management space, working for professional services consulting firms, delivering a lot of custom applications in the area of client server and web-based applications. That evolved more into custom e-commerce applications, and also a fair amount of implementation work and leading a professional services practice around off-the-shelf configurations and implementation as well. Now that I'm on the client side, so to speak, I've seen a few different perspectives of the e-commerce delivery chain. So I feel like I have a good perspective of what a lot of the vendor side perspective is, as well as on the business side, looking at those solutions and evaluating, selecting, and implementing those e-commerce solutions.
So tell me a little bit about what do you guys consider falls under B2B e-commerce? Because I think you were alluding to earlier that some of the things you guys do, people might not assume they think of a traditional e-commerce platform, but what kind of falls under your realm, I guess?
Since we're a B2B company, I guess everything that we do, electronic sales related, we consider to be B2B e-commerce. So the philosophy is really to meet the customers where they are. So we have some of our largest customers that we trade with. We're trading with them through basically EDI transaction marketplaces. So this is really a one-to-many EDI connection, where one healthcare provider can transact with multiple suppliers over the same connection, and vice versa. A supplier like Siemens Healthineers can transact with many healthcare providers over the same transaction marketplace. So there's one set of EDI standards that governs all the transactions, makes it much more cost effective to set up and maintain these connections. And also you have one set of standards governing all the EDI transactions. So you're not changing your transactions for each trading partner. There's one set of standards that everyone follows. And that's very efficient for doing a lot of business with large trading partners. And there's also a lot of data that you can glean just by having all the transactions in one place. So looking at these transaction marketplaces, they can look at a lot of the metrics and KPIs from just the transactions among their trading partners, and they can tell you where you rank as far as being easy to do business with, number of errors, number of discrepancies and exceptions and things of that nature. And likewise, they can give the same information to the healthcare suppliers participating in the network. How easy are they to do business? What's the cost of doing business with some of these other firms? So you get a lot of information that's kind of built into that platform that is really beneficial in looking at how do we efficiently engage and conduct business transactions with our partners.
So Dan, just a question to fill out some things for our listeners. So I'm aware of Siemens and what their business is really about. You're mentioning health, of course. Could you just kind of outline a little bit about what Siemens is and what you guys sell? And also maybe you could follow up that with kind of a pre-COVID and during COVID outline, because talking to other folks I know in the health space, many changes, lots of fast adaptations. I'd love to hear some of that so that our listeners can hear more.
Sure. So to give you a little high-level perspective, Siemens Healthineers is the healthcare business of Siemens AG, a German company. We were spun out of Siemens as an independent company probably about 3 years ago now. On our own, we're still a fairly large and complex organization. Overall, we have around 18 billion in revenue and 65,000 employees across 75 countries that we're doing business in. So it's a fairly large organization. If you look at who we are and kind of what we sell, the two examples I like to give to people to explain what we do or where you might encounter Siemens Healthineers. As we are a B2B company, we're generally not out there advertising to the public and to consumers, so a lot of people may not know much about us. So the two areas where you might encounter Siemens Healthineers, one is if you go to the doctor, maybe for an annual physical. They might take a blood or urine sample and send it to the quote unquote the lab. Well, the lab is really a large building somewhere with a high number of instruments and automated tracks that move your sample, which is in a vial now, from instrument to instrument, and tests are being conducted on that vial by various instruments. This lab, there's not many people in that lab. It's largely an automated warehouse, if you will, or a factory where your vial is barcoded and it's moved from instrument to instrument. So all the tests are conducted, the results are tracked electronically, that information is ultimately provided back to your healthcare provider. The other area where you might encounter, and we make the instruments and those automated tracks in the lab. I forgot the most important part, right? So we manufacture those instruments for these labs. This could be a large reference lab. It could be a lab that's part of your local hospital chain as well. The other area, and this is our laboratory diagnostics business. Another business area that you might be familiar with Siemens Healthineers is our imaging business. So if you injured your shoulder or maybe injured your knee and you go to the doctor and they recommend that you get an MRI. So MRI machines are another area where you might see Siemens Healthineers. If you go into that MRI facility, you might see Siemens Healthineers is the MRI instrument that you're kind of being fed into on the conveyor belt / stretcher, right? You go into an MRI machine and we make those MRI machines as well as x-rays, CAT scans, things of that nature. So the imaging business and that laboratory diagnostics business are the two areas that people might come in contact with Siemens Healthineers.
So it's
and then
not
the
a good.
second, oh, sorry, Isaiah, just the second part was the COVID piece, kind of wondering about just a quick observation on, since you're in health, right, pre-COVID, during COVID, and really coming out of all of that.
Yeah. So Siemens is a med tech manufacturer. We're not directly dealing with patients in a healthcare environment, but we are supplying, obviously, tests and instruments and imaging
Excuse me.
to the healthcare community. So one of the things that we saw during COVID is that a lot of or virtually all of the hospitals' regular traditional day-to-day business got put on hold when COVID hit. So any elective surgery, which really covers a lot of what people go into the hospital for, anything that can be delayed or put off was delayed and put off. So the demand for a lot of our traditional, imaging services and testing from our diagnostics unit really went to a very minimal level because the only thing hospitals were doing were working with COVID patients. So we saw a dramatic change to our business and what we did on a day-to-day basis change dramatically. Now, towards the end of COVID, we saw gradually hospitals opening up again, and we saw a restoration to previous levels of hospitals taking X-rays and MRIs and images, hospitals conducting tests to get these procedures flowing again. People get admitted to the hospital, need to get these tests done. So we saw that come back. And the other thing that we saw is we've actually just launched our first direct-to-consumer website.
Wow.
And as you mentioned, COVID, it's COVID rapid antigen self-tests that are now being made available to public in Germany, in the first place that this is available. So consumers and small businesses can now go online and purchase these tests directly from Siemens Healthineers. And this was a first for us with a direct-to-consumer model. So this is just started up. It's just a couple weeks old now. So really just getting it off the ground and trying to push forward with the marketing. But that's one area that's very different for us that we see. And then the other area that is somewhat behind the scenes is obviously our sales force has traditionally been a face-to-face sales force. Obviously, that couldn't happen during this COVID pandemic. And this is not directly in my area, but one of kind of our sister groups works very closely with the sales force to enable them with the right tools and the right methods and the right processes to help them kind of do their job more efficiently. So a lot of effort was put into educating and enabling that sales force to shift from a face-to-face in-person model to an online model. How do they interact with customers and prospect in a virtual online reality? How do they conduct those interactions? What does that process look like now that we can't have that face-to-face time with customers? And how do we interact with them? How do we teach them how to function in a LinkedIn and a social media type of environment versus just a face-to-face environment? So that was a whole nother aspect of the business, not directly related to e-commerce, but we felt that in a material way.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate that.
It sounds like almost everything falls under your department then. Everything's sales and marketing, and
there's a lot of things that we touch tangentially, but aren't directly within our purview. But it's hard to disconnect some of these things, right? The sales and marketing activities at some point will blend into e-commerce functions, so it's really hard to segregate those out.
Yeah, and I'm kind of making a joke, but I truly believe that the best e-commerce, companies are the ones that see it as kind of like the central connecting to sales and like maybe you're not necessarily doing every sale. There might be like in-person sales or things like that, but you're connecting all the pieces: sales, marketing, operations. So operations is a big piece, I think, that B2B commerce struggles with. So I want to get into that a little bit, especially because we don't always get the opportunity to talk to someone at such a scale of you guys. So you guys, and I think what B2B commerce or B2B companies struggle with e-commerce, especially kind of like, we work with a lot of like small, mid-sized companies, let's say 20 million, $100 million company. They kind of have all their operations living in the ERP system. That data is somewhat legacy. It's not really super readily available for the consumer to be like business buyer to be like, seeing, especially like product data and things like that. So how do you guys manage, how would you describe the B2B e-commerce operations, like maybe just a high level of like the tech stack, or I don't know how much you're allowed to tell us about that, but I'd be curious to understand kind of how you guys manage the complexity of the data and the operations at such a scale.
That's a loaded question. So let me back up a little bit. So
You might
I
have
was
to
starting
take
to
the
say
rest of the
earlier,
podcast.
I think it assumes that they do manage it, right? I mean, that's why it's loaded. Like, it assumes that they do manage it, right?
the short answer is that I think we struggle like most other organizations with some of those topics. If I come back to, talk about the tech stack, if I come back to that, we try to meet our customers, where they are, right? So we have some very large customers that we trade with, that we transact over these EDI transaction marketplaces in certain geographies where they exist.
Yeah.
Right? We have another layer of customers, also generally larger customers, that we transact with via EDI, directly in a one-to-one basis. Then we have other customers that are not transacting with us on a regular basis, where it makes sense for either one of us to establish an EDI connection. So here we move into the online web shops, where most people traditionally think of e-commerce. So this is a free channel for customers to come in and engage with us and order things online from Healthineers. We have several different web shops that we utilize, depending on the business area, depending on the geographic market, depending on some other internal factors that we don't need to get into.
Yeah.
Currently, we have one web shop, one online channel that drives the majority of our online revenue. But we have a few other web shops that we're using in particular situations. And part of that is just because we're a large organization and it's very decentralized. Part of that is there are projects that we want to try to stand up quickly and cost effectively. And if we can not integrate with that back end ERP environment, we can move a lot more quickly, especially if we're trying to respond to market conditions, or maybe fail fast, right? You want to try something new, see if it gains traction in the marketplace. So we can use some of these other web shops that we don't connect to the back end ERP just to try things quickly and to rapidly push things out.
That's super interesting. So basically, like at a high level, you have kind of like one enterprise e-commerce infrastructure for that does the majority of the sales. I'm guessing it's on some sort of like SAP Hybris or Magento type, more enterprise platform. And then you guys will have little smaller divisions. Would they stand up something as small as like a Shopify or Bigcommerce, or what kind of?
So you're on the right track, Isaiah. So, our platform that we generate a lot of our web shop revenue is currently on SAP Hybris. Bigcommerce is one of the applications that we use to stand up sites quickly. So we have a couple more, but yeah, those are some of our main platforms that we leverage.
Yeah.
Are you international, like literally everywhere, or are there places that you've decided not to be selling at this point?
So we are certainly international. As I mentioned, we do business in about 75 countries. Electronically, we're probably doing business in somewhere in the 20-something country range. One thing about our organization, we're very decentralized. We've grown up by acquisition. We have double-digit ERP transactional systems of record out there within the organization. So we don't really have one source of truth. We have source of truth by geography, by market in some places. So it's not that we have this one web shop that sells everything to everyone. As we are a regulated industry, being in med tech, we have to be careful about the information that we put out there, especially to our customers. We have to be careful that we're only selling and marketing products that we're allowed to sell and market in specific markets. So it ends up being web shops that are focused on a particular geography for a particular business area. So where we have capabilities, it's almost like populating a jigsaw puzzle, right? You have which market and which business area we have electronic selling capabilities for. It varies based on what country we're looking at, what business area we're looking at. If we've already built out the infrastructure and the plumbing work in the back-end ERP system to support those transactions for that particular business. So there's a few different factors that go into that. So we're in a lot of places and we have a lot of these tools in a lot of markets, but we don't have everything everywhere. And unfortunately, a lot of times right now, we have to reinvent the wheel to replicate things out there. There is a project underway to come up with or develop a master ERP system to support all of the business. That project is well underway. It's a long road and it's a long project, so we're not quite at the end of that road
That
yet.
sounds like a massive project.
It is truly a massive project.
Perhaps you could use Trellis to assist in that massive project.
I don't know.
couldn't pass that
Nice
up.
segue.
I don't know if we would be the right partner to do a giant ERP.
I just couldn't pass that up.
Yeah, no, we avoid those. We do a lot of integrations with the ERPs, but yeah, I'm curious on that side of things. And I know we keep going back to the ERP, but I think it's so important from a B2B perspective for e-commerce because the source of truth lives there usually. Is the goal of this project so that you have one ERP? Is it going to replace all these disparate ERP systems? Are they going to go away, or how is that? I don't know how much you're allowed to tell us, but
I believe the goal is to replace the existing systems and have one ERP to support the business where all of the healthcare business is in one location.
Wow, that makes sense. It makes sense. So, yeah, I can imagine that as a pretty massive project. So then, once that's done, it'll be a little bit easier for you to, in theory, integrate back to this one system or build some, repeatable things around that one system.
Certainly, and not only from a technical back-end perspective that we'd have one system to talk to on the back end, but also from business process perspective. So one of the goals of this overarching ERP system, if we can get to that point, is we're also trying to standardize the business processes along the way and not have so much deviation between how different countries and different business areas conduct their transactions. There's always going to be some local regulations that you have to follow with maybe fields that you have to capture another country doesn't need capture. But as far as a standardized business process, the goal is always to harmonize and standardize those processes. So as we can get more countries and business areas deployed on this new, called a master ERP system on the back end, hopefully those business processes align more closely. And now the process of connecting e-commerce functionality to that environment becomes much more straightforward because we have a common view of transactions with our customers as well as a common technical repository on the back end as well. So that's the goal. Gotcha.
So question I have around, maybe your advice for someone. It sounds like, what you guys are doing, and it makes a lot of sense, is that if you're trying to scale B2B e-commerce, at the top level, maybe your largest 5, 10, 20, or 100 customers, whatever that number is and whatever the math is, you focus on more of a direct EDI connection so they can basically like immediately order electronically from you. And then, the level below that kind of goes through e-commerce. And potentially that's a system like an SAP Hybris or Adobe Commerce is Magento now, and Bigcommerce, whatever that may be. And then you have some of these newer technologies that you can play around with to be a little bit more nimble. I think there's even a place for potentially like a Shopify direct to consumer kind of like basic store for some B2B companies.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities, and we try not to spread too thinly, right? We don't want to be supporting 15 different platforms if we can help it, right? So I'm already having to answer uncomfortable questions about why we have as many platforms as we do. Ideally, we'd have, one platform, ideally, when we can focus all of our resources and our energies on optimizing that platform. But there are different needs out there, and there's certain reasons why we have different platforms. So like I mentioned, I think we have 4 today. I think we're trying to hold to that number as much as we can. Another thing that we're trying to do, and you mentioned Connexium earlier, we're not currently utilizing them today, but we do utilize tools to take, so we talk about our customers again. We go, customers are interacting with us in EDI, interacting with us in these online web shops. And then some customers are still sending us orders via fax and email. So if we aren't successful in converting those customers to send us electronic orders, we are trying to take those orders and convert those to electronic orders before they reach our country sales organizations. So at least we can view and process those orders as electronic orders. And if our customers, we can't get some of them to send us electronic transactions, we'll go ahead and convert those to electronic transactions to at least try to make our internal processes more efficient and have things run more smoothly, less sources or avenues of orders coming in to these individual country sales organizations. That's another area that we look at. And Isaiah, you alluded to earlier, what do you consider to be e-commerce and electronic transactions? So this is an area that I think falls in that gray zone where customers aren't really sending us electronic transactions, but we're jumping in the middle and converting those to electronic transactions to at least make, again, our internal processes as efficient as we can be.
So Dan, one of the things I was interested in following up on a little bit is really about analytics. You're as you said, you're kind of distributed. You're doing 75 countries. You have multiple platforms. All kinds of different tech tools. People, right? Rules. So how are you doing analytics? Is that centralized? Is it also distributed around the world, or how is it done?
Another simple question.
That's what I'm here for.
That's why we have the podcast. There are no simple questions.
There are no simple questions.
There are no. That's a good topic to discuss. So obviously, analytics is very important, and it's very key for a lot of companies to focus on. With the setup of our organization, we have one of my sister groups really focuses on the analytics, metrics, and the analytics and reporting aspect. That's their area of specialty. Now they do this not only for e-commerce, but they do this for almost all of our marketing campaigns, and they do this for offline and online sales, right? So this is a separate group. They're very, very advanced in what they do. And I know a little bit about what they do, but I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm an expert and I understand the ins and outs. It's a very detailed and in-depth area of the business, and I don't pretend to be an expert in that area. They remind me how much I don't know occasionally. So they've standardized on a couple different tools. They try to centralize. They work very closely with the different country organizations, and they try to set up a lot of the marketing campaigns in a way that they have some commonalities and standards among them, so they can track the efficiency of a couple different things. So they look at our organic search results, our paid search, how those tools and how those resources are being utilized in different campaigns. They're also looking at our websites, online properties, not just our online web stores, but also just we have a tremendous amount of marketing pages for each country throughout the organization. So they're looking at what's driving traffic, not only to our commerce sites, but to our online marketing pages and to our country specific pages as well. So they're always tracking what's happening, what campaigns are driving traffic to which sites, how are those working, how efficient are those campaigns, how efficient is our spend, and then especially on the marketing sites and on the e-commerce pages, they're also tracking, that funnel activity. We get users onto a page. Are we retaining them? Are they leaving before they're submitting their shopping cart? What level are they dropping out? Where are they in the funnel? So they're tracking all of those metrics. And then a lot of this information is actually owned and run by the individual business areas in the countries. My group, kind of like an internal consulting team, right? We provide e-commerce leadership, help set up the right tools for the right countries and the right business areas. We have a large hand in managing of those EDI operations, but as far as a individual business area in a particular country running a campaign to drive traffic to whether it's an online marketing page or it's an e-commerce site in that country, we largely leave that up to the countries to work with our sister groups to run those individual campaigns. So we're kind of setting up that foundation or putting that groundwork in, building that highway, and then letting the local business run their campaigns as they see fit. So I don't get as involved in the day-to-day with some of the metrics and the analytics and the reporting. That's really someone else's spend, and they're trying to track how efficient they are and how they're driving traffic there.
So
does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And just one observation for our listeners. I mean, what you just brought up, it's similar in some ways to approaches, for example, with a major cybersecurity company that I've worked with, where they had 22 content hubs that had B2B and B2C components, depending on what the content hubs were. And these were like country specific or category specific content hubs. And then they were owned separately. And then there was one team that came in and reviewed all of them periodically to see what they could learn and bring back to share the good information. So I kind of like, that's a really interesting approach that you guys are up to. And it really reminds me of some others that I've seen that work very well.
Yeah, and I think we have a similar setup in a couple of different areas. So we have this, we'll call it analytics team, as you labeled it, that does work. It's a global team, and they do coordinate directly with the country level, the sales and the marketing folks, right? So they're very much involved in those marketing communications folks, keeping tabs on what things are happening, what campaigns they want to run, how efficient are they, how do they compare against other campaigns being run by other business areas in other countries. And there's a very sophisticated reporting model that all the information funnels into, and they can spit out dashboards. So that's a fairly advanced process. My e-commerce team, we're working globally across the countries as well. And my team is responsible for certain geographic regions. And likewise, they're responsible for communicating best practices out to those countries, understanding the challenges and the needs of those markets. What issues are they facing? What corporate directives are they trying to execute against? And we're working with them to, again, try to share these best practices, try to develop, what e-commerce solutions make the most sense for their market based on, who are their customers? Is that market largely selling to distributors? Is that market largely selling to hospitals and labs and smaller physicians' offices? So what is the market look like? What is the maturity of that market to conduct transactions online? So that's all the things that we kind of look at and try to coordinate globally. One of the things we haven't touched on yet today is my team looks at a broad definition of e-commerce. So we look at the entire order to cash life cycle. So not only how do we help our country sales organizations collect orders electronically, but how do we help them increase the percentage of invoices that we're distributing electronically? how do we help them capture those payments electronically?
Mhm.
And this might sound simple if it's all connected on, there's one website and we collect a payment and we spit out an invoice from that website, like a lot of your consumer-based websites do. But we have different ways of interacting with us, and it's EDI, it's transaction marketplaces, it's online web shops. And a lot of times in B2B, you're not collecting the payment up front. So that disconnect between the transaction and the invoices and the payments is a completely different process with its own life cycle. So we really try to look at helping the organization as a whole, and we partner very closely with the finance organization on these order to cash initiatives, and really try to see what can we do to not only have the traditional, what we think of a traditional e-commerce, kind of a web shop transaction conducted online, but how do we look at a broader B2B sense, look at the entire order to cash life cycle, and how do we automate that and make those transactions electronically? And that's another area of focus that we also work on throughout the organization.
It makes so much sense, and honestly, one of the things I get frustrated with is the amount of people that still pay us by check at Trellis. I'm like, you can just pay online. Like we're not like as quite as sophisticated as you guys. We just have QuickBooks Online, so it's very easy to pay online, right? But still, people inevitably like to send checks. So I'm curious, I don't know if you know this data, but when you transition someone to paying electronically, do you find that the operational costs, the time to getting paid is better for you guys? Like it's a win because they pay you faster and it's less overhead? Is there data on that?
Yes, certainly. Certainly. And actually, what we find is the ability to generate an invoice electronically has positive impact on our day sales outstanding, on our DSO. If you can get that invoice into the customer's hands, 3 days, 5 days, 6 days earlier, they can start their process to pay that invoice 3, 5, 6 days earlier. So we've seen a positive correlation between getting invoices out the door electronically versus sending them out in the mail with the DSO in some of those countries. Interesting point. Depending on where we're talking about, sometimes it's actually more cost effective for us to process a check than for a credit card payment. So it just depends on how it's set up, what's outsourced, and what those processes look like. Sometimes it can be more efficient to process a check for us. The fees to accept a credit card can be quite substantial.
Yeah,
and if you're talking about a large payment, there's quite a lot of fees that we pay to accept credit cards, necessary part of doing business. But this is an interesting point also, because as we're trying to proliferate e-commerce throughout the organization, not all the countries have the addiction to credit cards that we do here in the States.
Oh, absolutely.
And we don't always want to propagate that to other countries, because one of the initiatives that we get pulled into in the States is supporting the treasury and finance groups and thinking of ways that we can reduce our cost of accepting credit cards, those credit card transaction costs. So when we're trying to stand up different e-commerce capabilities in different countries, we're not always trying to default to accepting a credit card.
Well, I think
a
lot of it,
payments that are more efficient.
I think a lot of it though is also just wire, just electronic transfers instead of check. I think that's really where a lot of B2B companies I've been working with go.
Sure, if we can accept an ACH or a SEPA payment in another country, the direct bank transfers are generally a lot more efficient, and that's one of the things we try to always offer as a first preference, right? Before we start accepting those credit card fees.
That's what we do. We try and do ACH through QuickBooks credit card is a last resort for us because we don't want to pay the fee.
Right.
So, we do the same thing. But I'm curious, kind of going back to the digital operations, and we're starting to do more and more of this. Do you think that the future of automating some of this would be to basically develop a more real-time integration with the ERP to the e-commerce platform, so that all the orders, even if the order was made offline or in person or whatever it was, they can log into the e-commerce platform, see all their orders, and then pay via ACH automatically. And then obviously that would just get passed back to the ERP and reconciled. We're doing some work like that with some of our B2B customers, where it's fairly automated, real-time APIs. We're lucky to have a really strong ERP partner in a specific ERP market. Unfortunately, they only do one ERP, so I haven't been able to replicate it for other ERPs. But do you see where I'm going with that? It's kind of like this, basically like e-commerce is almost just this like front-end layer of the ERP, obviously with a lot more bells and whistles and functionality, but we're pulling in a lot of real-time data using the source of truth of the ERP.
Yes.
So
that makes a lot of sense, Isaiah. So one of the
go ahead.
One
Dan.
of the things that we do with our web shops that are integrated with our ERP backend. All right, can you guys hear me at all?
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
All right.
You okay, Dan? We can hear you.
Can't really hear you very well right now. You're breaking up a little bit.
I think it's your connection, Dan. We're doing okay.
Okay, great. So let me just continue, and I'll assume, yeah, unfortunately, I'll just keep going. And I think I can see you now, but your video was freezing before. So in our web shop environment today, we have a very tight integration with ERP backend. A lot of our customer relationships are quite complicated, maybe not more complicated than other businesses, but from my perspective, there's a lot going on. So because a lot of our customers are in the healthcare space, you have a lot of buying groups that hospitals participate in. There's been a big trend recently where a lot of hospitals are buying each other and aggregating, and the number of players in the market is getting smaller, and these hospital networks are becoming larger and larger. So they're gaining clout in being able to purchase from suppliers. When a customer from one of these large organizations is coming on to our website or to transact with us, we really need to know what organization they are part of. They have potentially different contracts they might be buying under. The current level of spend or their volume is going to determine the pricing that they're going to see when they come into one of our web shops. So a lot of times we'll do a certain level of call back to the ERP system to understand who this customer is, what their installed base looks like, and what they are typically buying. But we'll generally wait until they place items in their cart, if you will, and are ready to start the checkout process before we even show them pricing. That pricing routine can be so complicated, we don't attempt to replicate it within the e-commerce platform. We make a live call to the ERP platform. ERP platform takes all the parameters, runs it through their ERP pricing engine, the algorithm that runs in the back-end ERP system, and then spits out the prices for those particular products that customer is trying to buy and purchase in their cart. So it's a little bit different is they come into the system, they don't see prices in the beginning. Until we know more about who they are and what they are buying, we're not going to make that call to show them the pricing. And because that call can be a little bit expensive, we want to do that one time and have that call to the back end. So there is a deep integration between our e-commerce platform on the front end and our ERP on the back end. To the point you mentioned, Isaiah, it is almost an extension because they have the full capability of the ERP system on the back end. One of the things, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, no, it's Isaiah. So it's very similar to what we're doing, which to me signals that I think this is roughly the best way to do it. I mean, obviously, it could always be better in the future, but what we do, and we work a lot with Infor.SX, which is a distribution ERP, and we have a ERP partner called Expertech. And so what they do, and we co-developed a product for Magento just because at the time that it made the most sense with them. We built an integration for this ERP using, they have a middleware kind of layer. They build products for Infor.SX, so they have like a bunch of different products. We co-developed the product for e-commerce with them. Basically does exactly what you're saying. One of the features is pricing all comes from the ERP. You know, we can make it so it can show you the list price if they want to do that, if they want to have like a guest list price, or they can have it so it says like log in for price with a you know, like you can't see the price. You have to log into the price. It authenticates you as a customer based on the ERP customer and then shows the real-time price. I think what's different about what we've done, and I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts and why maybe you guys do it differently, is ours is pretty real time. So like if you log in, it'll immediately show you the price on the category, the product page. And I think it's maybe because the pricing is a little bit more simplistic through these customers where they might have a unique price, but it's just kind of all lives in the ERP. And then we have a caching layer to make sure it's fast enough. So it could be a little bit delayed. Like if they updated the price in the ERP, it might still have like the old cache price for like 15 minutes or half an hour in the middleware. But I'm curious as to why, like, is it because your pricing engine is so complex that you can't do that in real time? Is that why you can't show it on the category and product page?
Both. So the pricing is fairly complex. There's a lot of factors that go into what that price is. We are doing it in real time, but we're trying to do it once, right? So when a customer is finished selecting the products and then they're ready to start the checkout process, we're kind of coming back at that point. We're making a real-time call to the ERP to get the specific prices for all the different items they have. Our business is probably overly complex on the back end as well. There are different business areas within the organization, and a customer might have different relationships with those different business areas as well. Mm-hmm. So just getting, it sounds very simple. What's the price for this product? There's way too many factors that go into that calculation, and we want to make sure it's accurate. That's why we're letting the ERP calculate that. But again, that call is expensive, so we're trying to do it once. So we're doing it real time, but we're doing it once.
And so you decide the best way to do that once is in the cart checkout, like when you have enough information.
Right. Now, and I mentioned earlier, right, this is the model for our large customers, do a lot of transactions with us, kind of understand the relationship. If we have a new customer and it's a smaller inventory of products, it's maybe an area that's newer, we're going to go with a different model where we're going to show a lot more information up front. You'll have the pricing up front. You don't always need to log in. So more of kind of a B2C type of model for these customers that are truly just getting referred to us and are exploring and learning. It's a very different relationship than an existing customer is doing a very large amount of business with us, where they might have someone responsible for entering the order, someone else responsible for approving the order. There's different billing locations, shipping locations. There's a whole level of things that we have to go through to understand that customer. You know, what are they ordering? Is it refrigerated? Is it from a particular batch? There's so many things that we need to understand about that order before we can really give them the accurate information. So it's a process of what makes the most sense based on that relationship.
So Dan, kind of related to that. So the customer and your feedback and innovation processes. So, you know, I understand exactly what you're saying here about pricing and all of the different agreements and, you know, all these different kinds of things that would be, you know, in place for a particular customer. But, you know, where is the feedback loop and how does that work? Like if somebody's saying, you know, why don't you have this feature? Why don't you have this function? Can you do X and are you developing it? So how does that work for you guys?
Yeah, so that tends to go in a variety of ways because we don't have one main website that serves all customers and all markets. It's not really the mechanism to capture everything necessarily. We do have feedback mechanisms available on those websites. A lot of that feedback comes through the country's customer service organizations. So although our goal is to try to drive those online sales and electronic transactions, there is always a customer service organization that has, I don't want to say they own the relationship, but they have an ownership stake in that relationship with that customer. When a customer is in an emergency situation, or they really need some attention for a specific issue or a specific challenge that they're facing, there's always a customer-facing sales and service organization they can reach out to. So a lot of the feedback does come through those customer service organizations throughout the countries, and then that gets filtered generally back to my organization also. So it depends on, again, the channel we're talking about. A lot of those online sales does come through the customer service organizations. A challenge with some of our EDI transactions will come through a different channel, depending on if we have a one-to-one relationship or kind of a marketplace relationship with some of these customers.
So I have we're kind of at the
your question.
Yeah, that was great. I really appreciate that. I think Isaiah is getting close to wrapping up for us today. So Isaiah, what were you going to say?
Yeah, well, we didn't even, I mean, I think we're going to have to bring you back at some point, Dan. I know time's valuable, so it doesn't have to be next month or anything. It could be later in the year, next year. But honestly, we probably could spend a full hour talking about, what I think you're getting at, Tim, is how do they get requirements? How do they prioritize requirements?
Yep.
It's obvious with an organization this large, there's like an insane amount of features and functionality and little things they could develop. I mean, just even that API-based functionality is pretty complicated. And obviously, like all the design and front-end development. So how do you guys handle project management of all of this? Do you do it internally? Do you like leverage third parties like a Trellis? We have kind of a project management process that we bring our customers into. How do you guys handle the scale of project management of all of this? Do you use something like Jira, or how do you do that?
So from a project management perspective, this tends to be a lot of, believe it or not, smaller to medium-sized projects. Rolling out our core web shop platform solution is a very large project. That's kind of a different animal. But a lot of our projects tend to be smaller or medium in scope. If we're adding a new capability, if we're adding a new EDI channel in a new country, if we're adding a new trading mechanism between a different customer or trading partner. So those tend to be more manageable type projects. So we do that in a variety of ways. So we leverage both our internal IT organization and external third-party vendors. So we've selected a handful of vendors that are kind of our strategic best-of-breed vendors, and we leverage a lot of their capabilities to prevent us from reinventing the wheel. I have, as I mentioned, regional project managers on my team, and they will generally be the overall project manager, and they will be coordinating requirements with the country sales organization, and they'll be distributing and managing work for the local IT organization and or a third-party vendor, depending on what we're doing. For setting up an EDI connection, if it's a new web shop, if it's a new way of sending invoices electronically for a particular country. So they're really coordinating a lot of those efforts. These are not things that we're institutionalizing usually in a very thorough project management tool. There are a lot of quality gates that we have to go through as an organization. There's a good level of governance within the organization, being that we are involved in healthcare and we are an FDA regulated company. So we do have those controls and constraints, but we don't try to get too overbearing with the project management tool and methodology.
Yeah.
A lot of the things that we're doing rely on a lot of collaboration and cooperation with different parties. It's a lot of tracking down folks. It's not necessarily something that every minute is going to change, what happens on our timeline. So my internal team is very adept at working with internal IT and with these external partners. But we're also very knowledgeable in the SAP business processes, what has to happen in the back end. So they're in a very good place to understand the different interests and the different factions, and make sure that what we're doing and what we're proposing generates real business value and fits within the organizational processes and structure that we've outlined.
So let me ask you one last quick question, and we'll wrap up here. But I think it's really important, especially for less sophisticated B2B e-commerce or B2B businesses that are less sophisticated with B2B e-commerce. I think you guys are pretty impressive, honestly. I think you guys are probably at the higher end of B2B e-commerce than most businesses out there. So definitely got to give you credit for how you've gotten the organization to this point. But for perspective, when you say a smaller scope, like adding a new ADI connection, are these typically like, 50-hour, 100-hour, 200-hour, maybe like 10, 20, 30, $40,000 projects, like kind of little mini projects? Is that how you would describe them? Or just trying to get a sense of the scale of these like little mini, I mean, obviously some little things could be a few hours, but I'm guessing these are a little bit larger than that.
Yeah, I think you're in the ballpark. So some of these projects, when you look at some of these capabilities, you might be looking at a budget between maybe 15,000 up to a couple 100,000 in budget. I don't really look at it in hours quite so much, but multi-month projects, generally not multi-years.
Yeah, yeah. But it's important that you're saying this, because I think a lot of companies, I think a lot of companies get stuck and never really get far with B2B commerce because they think they can, do a full, major project for 75 grand or like, and it's just not enough budget to manage. And they usually don't have a very sophisticated internal team. So that means they need even more reliance on the third parties, right? So I think a lot of companies that are earlier stage than you guys with B2B e-commerce vastly under budget these projects and then inevitably fail and say, oh, well, the project failed, B2B commerce doesn't work. It's like, well, yeah, of course it didn't work because, you selected some kind of mediocre vendor on price and you didn't, vet out great partners because you didn't even consider the better partners that are probably more expensive. I personally think a lot of that is happening in the market. Maybe a level or two below where you guys are in the business, typically not the $1 billion companies, but we're seeing this a lot in the 25, 50, $100 million distribution manufacturing companies. I'm curious how you
I'm a big believer in having a strategy, knowing what you want to accomplish, but then trying to accomplish that in incremental steps, small projects, quick wins. I'd much rather see someone get a project up and running quickly and start to get feedback, right? You hear all about the minimal viable project. We hear that all the time, but get something up and running and get feedback from your customers, get feedback from the business partners, what's working, how is it working, and then decide what makes a logical next step or phase two. But take that feedback first before you charge ahead with what you think you might want second, because your customers may tell you something different. And the people actually processing those transactions may tell you something else. But I'm a big believer in getting something up quickly, getting feedback, and continuing to iterate.
So I think that's a great way to end, frankly.
Yeah,
because that's just a fantastic. I think our listeners are really going to, it's going to resonate with them because it certainly resonates with us.
Yeah. So would you agree that maybe, and I think this happens a lot in B2B, it's like, cut down your expectations. You can go live with a simpler site and at least get some value and then add to it later. I think that's mentality that more people should take,
Go live with a pilot customer or a handful of pilot customers even. Don't even turn it on for, the world or that market. Start with that pilot customer or group of pilot customers that you think might be open to experimenting and participating on this with you and giving you feedback.
I love that.
If you have some trusted customers you can work with, see what their feedback is before you even implement it. Hey, we're thinking about doing this. This is how it would work for you. Does this fit with your business processes? Would this be a smooth and frictionless process for you to go down this road with us, and get their feedback? Earlier the better. If you can do it in the design stage, more power to you.
And I've done that for B2C as well as B2B, and it works beautifully. So I really think that's a great way to go.
Dan, this was awesome. We're gonna have to bring you back, hopefully, if you're willing to come back, because I mean, we could probably keep going for a few hours here. But this isn't the
I'd
Joe
love to.
Rogan
It'd be my
podcast.
pleasure.
So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thanks to all our listeners for another episode of the Hard Truth About B2B e-commerce with Isaiah and Tim. And Dan, thank you. You were a great guest today.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, guys. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.